The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the quiet of a sleeping town, but a heavy, suffocating silence that presses in on you. The second thing? The smell. Sweet, cloying, like flowers and something else, something coppery and wrong. I opened my eyes, and that's when I saw it. The perfect town. Too perfect. And the dread, the cold, sharp dread that whispered a single terrifying thought. I wasn't supposed to be here. The worn, faded upholstery of the bus seat was the last thing I remembered before the world dissolved into a dreamless, heavy slumber. It was one of those marathon overnight journeys, the kind you take when you're too broke for a flight and too desperate to stay put. I was heading from the gritty, rain-slick streets of Portland to the sun-scorched promise of Los Angeles, chasing a job that probably didn't exist. The drone of the engine, the rhythmic thump of the tires on asphalt, the low murmur of other sleeping passengers. It was the perfect lullaby for a weary soul. When I woke, it wasn't to the familiar rumble or the grimy window view of a gas station at dawn. It was to an absolute profound stillness. The engine was off. The bus was empty, save for me. Sunlight, thick and golden, streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent fairies. My neck was stiff, and a dull ache throbbed behind my eyes. I blinked, trying to clear the fog of sleep, and peered outside. What I saw stole my breath. It was a town straight out of a 1950s postcard. Immaculate houses with white picket fences and vibrant manicured lawns. Roses of every conceivable color climbed trellises, their petals glistening with morning dew. The street was wide, paved with smooth gray stones, and lined with towering oak trees whose leaves rustled in a gentle, almost musical breeze. There wasn't a single piece of litter, not a blade of grass out of place. It was perfect. Unsettlingly perfect. My phone was dead, of course. I fumbled in my backpack for my charger, but there were no outlets on this antiquated-looking bus. A wave of unease, cold and sharp, washed over me. I pushed the heavy bus door open, it groaned in protest, and stepped out. The air was a revelation. It was clean, crisp, and carried that sweet floral scent I'd noticed earlier, now stronger, more defined. It was the smell of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, but underneath it, almost imperceptible, was that other scent, that faint, coppery tang that pricked at the back of my throat. I dismissed it as a lingering olfactory ghost from my pre-sleep gas station burrito. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast silence. The only answer was the cheerful chirping of birds I couldn't see. The town was called Havenwood. A polished, hand-carved wooden sign at the edge of what looked like a town square announced it in elegant, curling script. Underneath, a smaller plaque read, "Welcome, you're home." The sentiment, meant to be comforting, sent a shiver down my spine. I started walking, my worn-out sneakers a stark contrast to the pristine sidewalks. The houses were all variations of a charming, wholesome aesthetic. Some were quaint bungalows painted in soft pastels. Others were stately two-story colonials. Rocking chairs sat on porches, looking as if their owners had just stepped inside for a glass of lemonade. Wind chimes tinkled softly, their melodies weaving together into a serene, hypnotic symphony. But where was everyone? It was morning. The sun was high enough that people should have been stirring. Cars should have been pulling out of driveways, people should have been walking their dogs, children should have been heading to school. But there was nothing. No movement, no signs of life, just the eerie, picturesque stillness. My stomach rumbled, a rude, guttural sound in the tranquil air. I spotted a diner on the corner of the main street, a chrome and red marvel called The Daily Grind. A neon sign in the window, shaped like a steaming coffee cup, was brightly lit. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through my growing anxiety. Food, coffee, people. I pushed open the glass door, a little bell above it chiming merrily. The inside was as immaculate as the outside. Red leather booths gleamed, the checkered floor was spotless, and the chrome on the counter shone so brightly it hurt my eyes. Behind the counter stood a woman. She was the epitome of the 1950s housewife. Her blonde hair was coiffed in a perfect, unmoving helmet. Her dress, a cheerful yellow polka dot number, was cinched at the waist with a wide white belt. She wore a starched white apron, and her smile was the brightest, widest, most terrifyingly vacant smile I had ever seen. "Good morning, hun," she chirped, her voice as sweet and artificial as the saccharin in a diet soda. "Welcome to the daily grind. Take a seat anywhere you like." I slid into a booth, the leather cool against my skin. "Hi," I said, my voice hoarse. I think I'm a little lost. My bus, it just stopped here." Her smile didn't falter, not for a second. Her eyes, a startlingly bright blue, seemed to look right through me. "Oh, the bus brings all our new residents," she said, her tone breezy and dismissive. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Now, what can I get for you? A stack of pancakes, some bacon and eggs? The coffee's fresh." "New residents?" I echoed, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'm just passing through. I need to get to Los Angeles." The smile tightened, just a fraction, at the corners of her mouth. The blue of her eyes seemed to frost over. "Los Angeles," she said, the name sounding foreign and unpleasant on her tongue. "Why would anyone want to go to a place like that? So noisy, so dirty. Havenwood is much nicer. Havenwood is home." She placed a menu in front of me. It was a single laminated page with a handful of breakfast options. I noticed with a jolt that there were no prices. "I'll just have some coffee, please," I murmured, my appetite having vanished. She nodded, her perfect blonde curls bouncing, and turned to a gleaming chrome coffee pot. The silence in the diner was as profound as the silence outside. I was the only customer. I looked out the large plate glass window. The street remained deserted. The idyllic scene was starting to feel less like a postcard and more like a carefully constructed stage set. And I was the only actor who hadn't been given a script. The coffee was, I had to admit, the best I had ever tasted. Rich, bold, with no trace of bitterness. As I sipped it, the woman, who had introduced herself as Betty, wiped down the already spotless counter. She hummed a cheerful, tuneless melody, the sound grating on my already frayed nerves. "So," I began, trying to sound casual, "what's it like living in Havenwood?" Betty paused her wiping, her back still to me. "It's perfect," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. "Everyone is happy here. Everyone knows their place. We all work together to keep Havenwood beautiful and safe." "Safe from what?" I asked. She turned then, and her smile was gone. Her face was a blank, emotionless mask. "From the outside," she whispered, her blue eyes wide and filled with a fear so profound it was almost tangible. "From the chaos, the noise, the pain. Here, everything is orderly. Everything is good." She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "You're lucky the bus brought you here. So lucky." Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. A man walked in. He was the male equivalent of Betty, dressed in a crisp, button-down shirt, perfectly pressed slacks, and with his hair slicked back. He looked like he had just stepped off the set of Leave It to Beaver. He gave me a brief, curious glance, then smiled a wide, friendly smile at Betty. "Morning, Betty Lou," he said, his voice a booming, cheerful baritone. "Morning, Tom," she replied, her own dazzling smile instantly snapping back into place. The blank, fearful woman from a moment ago was gone, as if she had never existed. Tom took a seat at the counter, and Betty poured him a coffee without him having to ask. They engaged in a light, meaningless chatter about the weather, the upcoming town picnic, the prize-winning roses in Mrs. Gable's garden. It was all so normal, so mind-numbingly, terrifyingly normal. I felt like I was watching a performance, a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their lines but me. I finished my coffee, the rich liquid doing little to calm the frantic hummingbird of anxiety in my chest. I needed to find a way out. I needed to find another bus, a phone, anything that could connect me back to the world I knew. I stood up and placed a $10 bill on the table. "Thank you for the coffee," I said to Betty. She looked at the money as if it were a dead insect. "Oh, we don't use that here, hun," she said with a little laugh, as if I had told a silly joke. "Everything you need is provided." My blood ran cold. Provided by who? Her smile faltered again, that flicker of unease crossing her features. "By Havenwood, of course," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Havenwood takes care of us all." I backed away from the table, my hand reaching for the doorknob. I need to going," I stammered. Tom, the man at the counter, swiveled on his stool to face me. His friendly smile was still there, but his eyes held a strange, watchful intensity. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice losing some of its cheerful boom. "You just got here. You haven't even had a chance to see the town." "I have a job to get to," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. "A job?" Tom chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that didn't sound friendly at all. "You have a job here, in Havenwood. We all do. We all have a purpose. You'll find yours soon enough." My hand was on the doorknob now. I pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, my breath catching in my throat. It was locked. "The door seems to be stuck," I said, trying to keep the rising panic out of my voice. Betty and Tom exchanged a look. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but it was filled with a shared understanding that I was not privy to. "Oh dear," Betty said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Sometimes it does that. You just have to jiggle it a little." I jiggled the handle. Nothing. I threw my shoulder against the door. It was like pushing against a solid wall of rock. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Let me out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Tom slid off his stool and walked towards me. He was taller than I had realized, and his broad shoulders blocked out the light from the window. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of paternalistic disappointment. Now," he said, his voice calm and soothing, the kind of voice you use to gentle a frightened animal. "There's no need to get upset. You're just a little disoriented from your journey. Why don't you come and sit back down? Betty can make you some of her famous pancakes. You'll feel much better after a good breakfast." He reached out a hand to place on my shoulder. I flinched back as if I had been burned. "Don't touch me," I snarled, the fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "What is this place? Why can't I leave?" Tom sighed, a long, weary sound. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said, his voice hardening. "You should be asking, why would I want to leave?" He gestured around the pristine diner, at the gleaming chrome and the spotless floor. "Look around you," he said. "Is this not better than the world you came from? A world of filth and crime and endless soul-crushing work. Here, you have everything you need. A beautiful home, good food, a community that cares for you. All we ask in return is that you contribute." "Contribute how?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. Betty answered from behind the counter, her voice taking on that same reverent, almost hypnotic tone she had used before. "We all have a role to play," she said. "We all do our part to maintain the perfection of Havenwood, to keep it pure." The way she said the word pure sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Suddenly, the bell above the door chimed again. A young woman entered. She looked to be about my age, with wide, frightened eyes and clothes that, like mine, were a stark contrast to the polished perfection of Havenwood.
She was wearing jeans and a band t-shirt, and her hair was a messy, vibrant shade of purple. She looked around the diner, her expression a mixture of confusion and terror that I knew mirrored my own. My bus, she stammered, her voice trembling. It just stopped. Betty's dazzling smile snapped back into place. "Good morning, hon," she chirped, as if nothing was amiss. "Welcome to the daily grind. You must be our other new resident. Take a seat anywhere you like."
Tom turned his attention from me to the newcomer, his friendly demeanor returning as if a switch had been flipped. He walked towards her, his hand outstretched in a gesture of welcome. "Welcome to Havenwood," he boomed. "We're so glad you could join us." The girl, whose name I would later learn was Maya, shrank back from him, her eyes darting between me and the locked door. She saw the panic in my face, the desperate plea in my eyes, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between us. We were two flies caught in the same beautiful, terrifying spiderweb. While Tom and Betty were momentarily distracted by Maya, I saw my chance. I bolted, not for the locked front door, but for the swinging kitchen doors I'd seen behind the counter. I crashed through them, the sound echoing in the silent diner. The kitchen was as immaculate as the rest of the diner. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under fluorescent lights. For a frantic second, I thought I was trapped, but then I saw it. A back door propped open with a small wedge of wood. Freedom. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted for the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear Tom shouting behind me, his voice no longer friendly. "Get back here! You don't know what you're doing!" I burst out into a narrow alleyway behind the diner. The air here was different. The sweet floral scent was gone, replaced by a thick metallic odor. The coppery smell. It was stronger here, almost overpowering. My eyes watered. I looked down. The ground of the alley wasn't paved. It was dark, damp earth. And there, half hidden beneath a pile of discarded cardboard boxes, was a dark, reddish-brown stain. I didn't let myself dwell on it. I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my lungs burning, my sneakers slapping against the pristine pavement of the deserted streets. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from the diner, from Betty and Tom, from their vacant smiles in their terrifyingly perfect town. I ran for what felt like miles, weaving through a labyrinth of identical, charming houses. The silence was still there, a constant, oppressive presence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. I kept expecting to see someone, to hear a shout of alarm, but the town remained stubbornly, unnervingly empty. Finally, gasping for breath, I stumbled to a stop in what looked like a small park. A pristine green lawn sloped down to a placid, crystal-clear lake. A weeping willow tree trailed its long, graceful branches into the water. There was a playground with a brightly painted swing set and a slide. It was another picture-perfect scene, but now the perfection felt menacing, sinister. I collapsed onto a park bench, my body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and terror. I had to think. I had to find a way out. The town couldn't go on forever. There had to be an edge, a boundary where this nightmare ended and the real world began. As I sat there trying to catch my breath, I noticed something odd about the playground. The swings were swaying gently in the breeze, but they were all moving in perfect unison, like a well-oiled machine. Back and forth, in a silent, hypnotic rhythm. It was unnatural. It was wrong. A child's giggle, faint and distant, reached my ears. The same giggle I'd heard when I first stepped off the bus. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the playground. I stood up, my fear warring with a desperate need for answers. I crept closer, using the trunk of a large oak tree for cover. And then I saw them.
The children. There were 3 of them on the playground. A little boy on the swings, a little girl at the top of the slide, and another little girl in the sandbox. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like something out of a history book. The boy wore overalls and a straw hat. The girls were simple cotton dresses. And they were all pale, so incredibly pale. Their skin was almost translucent, their hair a washed-out, lifeless shade of blonde. But it was their eyes that made my blood turn to ice. They were the same startlingly bright, vacant blue as Betty's. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was utterly unnerving in children. The boy on the swing didn't pump his legs. The swing moved on its own, carrying him back and forth in that perfect rhythmic arc. The girl at the top of the slide didn't slide down. She just sat there, her legs dangling, a small, unnerving smile on her pale lips. The girl in the sandbox wasn't building a sandcastle. She was meticulously arranging a collection of smooth gray stones in a perfect repeating pattern. They weren't playing. They were performing, just like Betty and Tom. Suddenly, the boy on the swing stopped. He turned his head, his vacant blue eyes locking directly onto mine. He knew I was there. He smiled, the same wide, empty, terrifying smile as his mother. And then he spoke, his voice not the cheerful lilt of a child, but a flat, toneless whisper that seemed to echo in the silent park. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. The other two children stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me, their blue eyes drilling into me, their smiles widening in unison. The air grew cold, and the sweet floral scent of Havenwood returned, thicker and more cloying than ever before. I didn't need another invitation to run. I turned and fled, my mind screaming. The children didn't follow. They just stood there, watching me go, their silent, smiling faces a tableau of pure, unadulterated horror. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were numb and heavy. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get as far away from those things as possible. I eventually found myself on the outskirts of the town. The manicured lawns and pristine houses began to thin out, replaced by a dense, dark forest. Hope surged through me. The edge. I had found the edge. But as I drew closer, I saw it. A fence. A high, wrought iron fence that stretched as far as I could see in either direction, disappearing into the dense woods. The bars were thick and close together, topped with cruel, sharp spikes. It wasn't designed to keep people out. It was designed to keep them in.
Despair, black and suffocating, washed over me. I was trapped, truly and utterly trapped. I sank to my knees before the impassable barrier, the perfect, manicured grass of Havenwood beneath me, the dark, forbidding woods of the outside world just beyond my reach. It was then that I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Had they followed me? Was it Tom or Betty or those terrifying children? But it was none of them. It was Maya, the girl from the diner. Her face was pale, her purple hair in disarray, and her eyes were wide with a fear that mirrored my own. "I followed you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw you run. I had to get out of there." A wave of relief, so profound it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who saw the wrongness of this place. "Did you see them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The children?" She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "And the others," she said, her voice catching on a sob. "The neighbors. They all have the same eyes, the same smiles. They move like puppets." We huddled together by the fence, two strangers united by a shared terror. We talked in hushed, frantic whispers, sharing our stories, our fears, our desperate, dwindling hope. She had woken up on the same bus, found herself in the same nightmare. She had been welcomed by another one of the town's residents, a man named George, who had offered her a lovely little cottage and a purpose. She had seen the emptiness behind their eyes, the rehearsed perfection of their lives. As we talked, the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the perfect town. The sweet floral scent in the air grew stronger, more cloying, almost nauseating. And then a new sound reached our ears, a low, rhythmic humming. It seemed to be coming from the center of the town. It grew steadily louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the ground, through the very air we breathed. "What is that?" Maya whispered, her voice filled with a new kind of dread. "I don't know," I said, my eyes scanning the town. "But I have a feeling we don't want to find out. We have to find a way out. The fence was our biggest obstacle." We started walking along its perimeter, our eyes scanning for any weakness, any gap, any place where we might be able to squeeze through. But it was seamless, perfect, just like everything else in Havenwood. As darkness fell, the town began to change. Lights flickered on in the windows of the houses, casting a warm, inviting glow. But there was no one to be seen through the windows. The houses were just empty, illuminated shells. The humming grew louder, more insistent, a constant, oppressive presence in the now chilly night air. And then we saw it. A gate, a massive, ornate, wrought iron gate, flanked by 2 stone pillars. It was closed, of course, and locked with a heavy, rusted chain and a padlock the size of my fist. But it was a gate, a way out. "We need a key," Maya said, stating the obvious, "or something to break the lock." "Where would we find that?" I asked, my voice laced with hopelessness. And then I remembered. The alley behind the diner, the discarded cardboard boxes, the dark reddish-brown stain on the ground, the coppery smell. What if there was something more in that alley? A tool, a weapon, something discarded by the town's sanitation department. It was a long shot, a desperate, foolish hope, but it was the only one we had. "We had to go back," I said, my voice grim. "Back to the diner." Maya looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Back there? With them?" "We don't have a choice," I said, my own fear a cold knot in my stomach. "It's our only chance."
And so, under the cover of a moonless, starless night, we began to make our way back into the heart of the perfect, terrifying town of Havenwood. The humming was our constant companion, a sinister, unseen heartbeat that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the place. We crept through the deserted streets, flitting from shadow to shadow, our hearts pounding with every rustle of leaves, every creak of a distant floorboard. The town felt different at night. The perfection was still there, but it had taken on a new, more menacing quality. The warm lights in the windows of the empty houses no longer looked inviting. They looked like the glowing eyes of some great sleeping beast. The silence was heavier, more profound, broken only by the incessant rhythmic humming. We finally reached the alley behind the diner. The coppery smell was still there, thick and nauseating in the still night air. With trembling hands, we began to sift through the pile of discarded cardboard boxes. And then my fingers brushed against something cold and hard. It was a crowbar, rusted, heavy, and stained with the same dark reddish-brown substance as the ground. We had our key. The journey back to the gate was even more terrifying than the journey to the diner. The humming seemed to be getting louder, more insistent, as if the town itself was aware of our intentions. We could feel it, a palpable, malevolent presence all around us. We reached the gate, our breath coming in ragged, fearful gasps. I wedged the end of the crowbar into the chain and pulled. The rust flaked off, but the chain held firm. I pulled again, putting all my weight into it, my muscles screaming in protest. Maya helped me, her small frame surprisingly strong. We pulled together, grunting with the effort, the sound loud and jarring in the silent night. And then, with a screech of tortured metal, one of the links in the chain snapped. We were free.
We didn't waste a moment. We scrambled through the gap we had created, our hands and clothes catching on the sharp, broken edges of the chain. We ran. We ran into the dark, forbidding woods, away from the perfect, manicured lawns, the empty houses, the vacant, smiling faces of Havenwood. We didn't look back. We didn't dare. We just ran, fueled by a primal, desperate need to escape. The humming faded behind us, replaced by the sounds of the forest. The snap of twigs under our feet, the hoot of a distant owl, the whisper of the wind through the trees. These were real sounds, natural sounds, and they were the most beautiful things I had ever heard. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We collapsed at the base of a towering pine tree, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and lingering terror. We had escaped. We had actually escaped. But as we sat there, in the quiet darkness of the forest, a new, more insidious fear began to creep into my mind. The coppery smell, the dark stains, the provided food, the town's obsession with purity and contribution, the vacant, soulless eyes of its residents. What was the true purpose of Havenwood? What was the source of its perfection?